Moscow mocks European leaders, calling them weak. Lavrov praises Trump's constructive talks. Trump shifts on Ukraine's stance. No ceasefire, no sanctions. Instead, bows to follow Putin's plan. A peace deal that means ceding land, not stopping war. Europe fumes. Macron, Starmer, Meloni, von der Leyen accused of sucking up. Allies warn. Trump's concessions could fracture Western unity. And now, whispers of a Putin-Zelensky meeting in Hungary. The first since the war began. Russian politicians have ridiculed European leaders following their White House meeting on the Ukraine war. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev called out European leaders, accusing them of failing to outplay US President Donald Trump during their meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House. In his post on X, Medvedev also mocked Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, questioning how the clown from Kiev would act once he was back home and wearing his military uniform.
The anti-Russian warmongering coalition of the willing failed to outplay President Donald Trump on his turf. Europe thanked and sucked up to him. The question is which tune the Kiev clown will play about guarantees and territories back home, once he's put on his green military uniform again.
The former president of Russia used coalition of the willing in his statement, referring to a group of European leaders who formed a pact to support a peace deal in Ukraine. Those leaders at Monday's meeting included French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and Finnish President Alexander Stubb. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen were also in attendance. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said it was clear at Friday's US-Russia-Alaska summit that Donald Trump and his team sincerely wanted to achieve a long-term and sustainable peace in Ukraine.
The atmosphere during Alaska talks was very good. And it was reflected in the statements that Presidents Putin and Trump made after the talks. A useful conversation. It was absolutely clear that the head of the United States and his team firstly truly want to achieve the result that will be long-term, sustainable, and reliable. Unlike the Europeans, who at that time shouted on every corner that there must be a ceasefire, after which they would continue to supply weapons to Ukraine. President Trump and his team, especially after the meeting in Alaska, took a much deeper approach to settling this crisis, realizing that it is necessary to eliminate the root causes. That's what we and President Putin have been saying all along. And one of these root causes is the issue of Russia's security. The fact that commitments given to us on preventing the expansion of NATO to the east have been consistently violated for decades. The president noted several times that after these promises were given, there were 5 waves of NATO expansion.
Speaking to Russia 24 state television channel, Lavrov contrasted what he said was the constructive US position to that of Europe, some of whose leaders took part in an extraordinary summit at the White House on August 18th with Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky to discuss Ukraine.
Zelensky said in Washington that yes, I would be ready to negotiate, but I won't even discuss any territories because the Constitution forbids me. It is an interesting point because ironically, the Ukrainian Constitution still retains the guarantee to fully ensure the rights of Russian. It is emphasized separately, and other national minorities, despite the past laws prohibiting the Russian language in all spheres of human life. If he cares so much about his Constitution, then I would start with its first articles where this guarantee is pinned. But there's nothing new that all of this has been swept under a carpet by various figures such as Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, and Olaf Scholz before him. And Joe Biden, of course, and his administration. They were among the leaders in ignoring and misquoting all the facts that, in general, lie in the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis.
Before embarking on his journey to Alaska, President Trump vowed he would not be happy if Vladimir Putin refused a Ukraine ceasefire, warning there would be severe consequences. But after his summit with the Russian leader, Trump left with no ceasefire, no deadline, and no sanctions, instead praising the meeting was a 10. In a dramatic reversal, Trump dropped his main objective and adopted Putin's preferred strategy, negotiating a broader peace deal that would require Ukraine to cede territory, the New York Times reported. The effect, which analysts say, is to hand Moscow a free pass to keep waging war indefinitely, without new penalties. Former NATO ambassador Ivo Dalda called it a sad spectacle, saying Putin outplayed Trump in minutes. Trump's allies, meanwhile, framed the pivot as a step toward a larger peace summit with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, though critics warn it delays, rather than stops, the killing. For now, Putin emerges from Alaska unconstrained, as Trump declares victory. Meanwhile, Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey urged the UK government to call out a massive concession to Putin after Trump backed away from demands for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Speaking on LBC, Sir Ed said European leaders should make clear to the Kremlin and the White House that they will not back a peace agreement just because Trump wants to do a deal.
We're still digesting what occurred in the White House, but I'm still pretty worried that Donald Trump just wants to do a deal with Vladimir Putin. And that comes first, rather than the interest of Ukraine and European security. We need to send a message to the Kremlin, and indeed the White House, that we are there with Ukraine to the end. And that's why we've been saying, give them more military support. Seize those frozen Russian assets. Send that signal that we're not there to back some deal that Trump wants just because Trump wants to do a deal.
Meanwhile, Reuters reported on August 19th, citing a US administration source, that the talks between Zelensky and Putin could be held in Hungary. The meeting would mark the first encounter between Zelensky and Putin since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. The two leaders last met in Paris in December 2019 as part of Normandy format talks mediated by France and Germany. In April, Hungary's parliament voted to approve the country's withdrawal from the International Criminal Court, potentially allowing Putin to visit the country despite his arrest warrant issued in 2023 over the abduction of Ukrainian children. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, whose government is widely seen as authoritarian, has blocked or delayed military aid to Ukraine, maintained ties with Putin, and echoed Kremlin narratives.